Can you think of a more iconic movie than Quentin Tarantino's 1994 film Pulp Fiction? The soundtrack, the fashion, the lurid content. It even has a lot of swears from Mr. Samuel Jackson and the rest of the star-studded cast. There's a lot to love about this movie, but can the same be said for these iconic characters? Today, we will be ranking the cast of Pulp Fiction from good to evil. But before we begin, if you're a Tarantino fan, we just wanted to mention another Tarantino video that we helped make over on our friend's new channel, Reel to Reel. Our friend Tom, who's worked on Wicked Binge, did a really cool video breaking down how historically accurate Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was to the era. So check out his channel if you dig these types of movies and want to show some love to some of the Wicked Binge team who worked on it. For this list, we'll be ranking characters of Pulp Fiction into three categories: the good, the great, and the bad to evil. Really, our only rule for this list is that morality is relative. Even our top few spots have done some things we would not condone. We begin with the good. In a story filled with killers, fighters, and drug lords, that is a rare enough thing to come by. A little bit of good goes a long way on this list. Taking the gold medal of good is Captain Coons. Christopher Walken's scene as Captain Coons is one of the more bizarre in this movie. The way that he speaks to young Butch in this flashback is uncomfortable and overly graphic. He definitely goes into more detail than necessary when describing how exactly he smuggled the gold watch that Butch's dad left for him out of the POW camp that they were imprisoned in together.
5 long years he wore this watch. Up his ass.
Probably not the sort of thing a child should hear. It's probably not the sort of thing his mother wanted to hear either. But we have to give him credit. He got that watch back where it belonged after being away for 7 years. Thanks to his oversharing, we know the physical costs associated with doing so, which honestly makes it more impressive. We are awarding the bronze medal of good to the waitress. You may be wondering what exactly the waitress of the diner did to earn such a high spot on this list. She did nothing, but that's sort of the point. We have her here symbolically as a stand-in for all the characters who get through the movie without doing much of anything at all. The waitress at the diners themselves, the woman on the street when Butch crashes the car, even the Marilyn Monroe impersonator. Tarantino has painted such a bleak portrait of LA that we feel the bystanders have more than earned their spot just by not doing anything illegal in order to survive, or associating themselves with anyone who does. It's an impressive feat in this movie and a good indication of where the bar is moving forward. The bronze medal of good goes to Fabienne. Butch's French lover is one of the most innocent people in the film, aside from the fact that she is with Butch. She obviously isn't in the loop about every shady dealing Butch has going on. We see multiple times how he likes to keep her in the dark, and how she sometimes encourages this. A great example is the fact that she didn't know that Butch had killed Wilson in the boxing match because she never listens to the broadcasts. She seems to be a sweet, almost whimsical character. If anything, we think she's too capable of forgiveness for the way that she allows Butch to call all the shots and drag her around even after she's made him acknowledge that they're in serious danger. We don't think she should have stayed with him, but we can sympathize with her decision to do so. They make each other happy, and it's very possible she doesn't understand the extent of his crimes. Following her is our first shared slot, going to Lance and Jody. It seems like a far leap from the girlfriend of a boxer to an actual drug dealer and his wife, but we feel like these two don't mean much harm. Lance, who sells the drugs that Mia nearly ODs on to Vincent, clearly sees himself as more of a connoisseur of drugs than a desperate dealer. He operates the establishment out of his home, speaks about quality, and even lets his clients shoot up on the premise, which is definitely safer than using a loan. After business hours, he has a no-contact policy that we see get broken. On the other hand, it's not good that he seems reluctant to let Vincent bring Mia onto his property when he fears an OD. On the other hand, he does relent and help save her life. One of the most telling aspects here is that he's never had to help with an OD before. This might be the result of his no-contact policy, but it does imply a certain level of responsibility regarding how much he sells and to whom. We have included his wife Jody in the slot because the pair of them operate as a team. Sometimes that team is yelling at each other during a crisis, yes, but other times they're experiencing what a tongue stud can do for their private lives and spreading the good word. Up next is Esmeralda. This is a weird entry, and it won't be our last. The actions that Esmeralda actually takes in the movie are all objectively bad. She talks to and then agrees to cover for Butch, whom she knows has just killed a man with his bare hands. Not great. What gives us pause is the fact that she seems to do some of this out of empathy. Butch got himself into a bad situation very deeply. Most people he encounters in the wild seem to want him dead for it, and by contrast, Esmeralda seems quite kind. She's someone to keep an eye on, and seems a little too interested in what it's like to kill a man. But unlike so many characters of the movie, she keeps her head down, gets her job done, and no one gets killed directly as a result. Rounding out the good tier is Jules. We're not gonna lie, he is our favorite character. He's the most complex and definitely gives us the most to dive into. You could watch this movie a dozen times and see something different in him with each viewing. This is the sort of man, after all, who memorized Ezekiel 25:17 from the Bible just so he would have something cool to say before he popped a cap in a person Mr. Wallace wanted dead. Even before we see him going in for those first few kills, we see him take a minute to get into character. It could be just a phrase that he uses when he's trying to get ready for a dangerous part of his job. We think it's more likely that he disassociates himself from this person he plays at work who is capable of, and in fact enthusiastic about violence. He is capable of some pretty terrible things. Anyone working for Mr. Wallace would have to be, but Jules in particular is one of the hitmen. He sees some of the worst aspects of the operation in his day-to-day life. It doesn't seem to faze him either. Though there are times when he expresses anger, even out of character, he remains one of the calmest and most collected people in the movie. This culminates in a change towards the end of the movie that actually saves him from the gray category. After all the bullets from a gun miss both him and his partner Vince, Jules is convinced that he witnessed an actual miracle.
You know what divine intervention is?
He says that he's going to turn his life around and begin walking the earth. Immediately after that, we get to see him make good on this promise. When the diner is robbed, he takes control of the situation. Rather than to kill when he has the upper hand or try to get revenge, he has a discussion with the robbers about that Bible verse. It's clear from the multiple interpretations he shares that he doesn't have it all figured out yet. But, in his own words, he is trying real hard to be the shepherd. He gives the robbers $1,500 of his own money to try and steer them towards a righteous path, even as he struggles to find the path himself. It's not a full redemption arc, but it's its upward trajectory that makes us treat him as a righteous man. Next up, we have the Gray. These are the characters who are just a little too complicit in their criminal activities. First up is Mia Wallace. For how iconic Uma Thurman's performance was, we didn't get to know a lot about her character. She's a unique and decisive woman who we see is quite adept at getting what she wants. Part of it, in this situation, is that she's married to the boss.
Don't be a...
But it seems to go much deeper than that. She's charming, engaging, she's the sort of woman that men believe is worth killing someone over. Rumors circulate that her husband has. Most of what we see her do on screen is quite tame in the grand scheme of things. A little teasing, a little coercion, and a hefty amount of stolen drugs. fine. But her true crime, we think, is complacency. The fact that she could have done anything, even had a promising start as an actress, and chose to let herself settle for a violent drug lord is honestly a little disappointing. The fact that she continues to make things worse, or at least more dangerous for his employees, says a lot about how detached she is from the world that Mr. Wallace has brought her into. We empathize with Mia, who it seems has a lonely life, but it's one that she has chosen and continues to choose for herself. Next up is Butch. In almost the exact opposite trajectory of Jules, Butch seems to quickly get more comfortable with a life of crime. He agrees to take a fall in a match to earn Mr. Wallace a lot of money. Then, despite knowing that it will endanger himself and the people close to him, he decides to bet against Mr. Wallace and not take the hit. This might have made him a very rich man in Tennessee, but it made him a very wanted man in LA. He learned in the cab that the man he was fighting, Wilson, died as a result of the injuries. He looks troubled by it at first, before stating that he doesn't feel the least bit bad. The next time he kills someone that Wallace had sent to scope out his apartment, he actually laughs about it. There are other troubling aspects of his character as well, namely his violent streak. We're not talking about the boxing or the killing, but the outburst he has aimed at his girlfriend when she forgets his father's watch. We don't actually see him hurt her, and he does apologize, but the fear in Fabienne's voice speaks volumes here. With all of these problems, it seems like he could be lower on the list. We did consider it, but Butch also does one of the best deeds of the entire movie, and it didn't even take a stroke of divine intervention to talk him into it. When he and Mr. Wallace are held prisoner in the basement of Maynard's shop, Butch is the one to escape. Considering no one knows where they are, and Mr. Wallace wanted him dead at the time, it would have been both safe and easy to sneak away. Two birds with one stone. Butch chooses instead to go back down into the basement with a sword and rescue his enemy. It proves that even if his actions are scummy, he does have a good heart in there somewhere. Next up is Jimmy. Despite, or perhaps because of, Jimmy being played by Quentin Tarantino himself, there is something instantly unlikable about the character.
Did you notice a sign in the front of my house that said dead storage?
And talk about complacency. There are many characters on our list who are at least partially bad by association. You've seen some of those entries already, like the one for Mrs. Wallace. But at least Mia is just following the lead of her husband. Jimmy is supporting one of the biggest crime families, covering up a murder, keeping it a secret from his wife, and complaining the entire time about what an inconvenience it is to him. We understand that having a short window to clean up a body in is probably an inconvenience, but the solution should be to help or to, not help hide the crime in the first place. Watching him stand there and crack jokes was, in summation, not helpful. With little screen time and no good deeds to balance this out, we feel this is a good spot for him. Rounding out the gray tier, we have the Gimp. This could have been just another quick entry about crimes of association, but the Gimp actually helps Zed and Maynard in their attempts to abduct and assault two men. Butch tries to leave past him and actually ends up having to fight him, so he can't alert the two about the escape. We don't judge him for what he likes to have done to him consensually in his free time, but forcing that onto unwilling participants, that is the opposite of righteous. The only thing, and we mean only thing, from saving him from the tier below is that his power was so very limited. It could be some kind of Stockholm syndrome, or he might not have the full grasp of everything that is happening around him. For this reason, we are giving him some leeway, but this was a pretty scummy thing to attempt all the same. We move now into the bad to evil. Since no one on this list was totally pure, we'll just admit that it's mostly evil. First up is Winston Wolfe. Winston plays everything off as cool as a Sprite after a big kahuna burger. Honestly, that's what's so terrifying about him. His role in this story as a sort of a cleanup man with all the answers just gives off the impression that he's done this sort of body cleanup a lot. Too much. He has too much experience in this field.
Fine job, gentlemen.
While we are impressed, we're also more than a bit mortified. Next, we have a tied spot, Pumpkin and Honey Bunny. These two are a team and we just couldn't bear to separate them. Gun to our head, we do think that Honey Bunny has a bit more of a conscience. In the opening scene of the film, she's shown having sympathy to a hypothetical girl. That being said, we also think she's the one more likely to snap and shoot someone by accident. So we digress. They're both selfish, violent, and unstable. They probably deserve one another, and if there's one thing we can say in their favor, it is that they do seem to care about one another, if nothing else. The fact that they talk about giving it all up is a good sign, but the willingness to shoot, rob, and steal says more about their character than we ever could. Taking the bronze medal of evil is Vincent. At a glance, it may seem like Vincent and Jules would be on a level with one another, especially on a first viewing of Pulp Fiction. We actually don't think that the two partners have much in common. Aside from the obvious, Jules' actions of forgiveness at the end, Vincent seems to have more rage inside him. He has more violent outbursts, he is more self-involved, and his patience is almost non-existent. When he accidentally shoots a man in the car, his attitude is very indicative of these traits. He gets loud and defensive when Jules tries to correct him. He whines about having to clean up the mess and being ordered around. He even tells his partner, whose car has just been utterly ruined by this slip-up, that he has endured a few jabs, but there is a limit on how much he's willing to take in regards to just being told he was wrong. There's also his willingness to make Mia Wallace the problem of his drug dealer. Mia didn't die, but the fact that he was told explicitly not to bring her at all didn't bode well. Lance just didn't want to get in trouble, but it was also possible he didn't have anything that could have saved her. As we've already talked about on this list, Lance had never had to deal with an OD before. It was just another one of Vince's messes that he was incapable of cleaning up for himself. Taking the silver medal of evil is another team, Zed and Maynard. Maynard is the owner of the shop, and Zed is his sadistic, partner, for lack of better word. We won't even talk about his use of slurs, since they're used so widely across the board. He is aggressive and rude from the very first moment we see him in his shop encountering Butch and Mr. Wallace. When two men are found trying to beat one another to death in his store, Maynard takes things to a whole new level of cruel. He knocks them out, drags them to the basement, binds them, gags them, and calls Zed to come over. The movie actually goes as far as to show Zed assaulting one of them. This was one of the most brutal and shocking moments to the audience upon the film's release, and this in a movie where every part of it was shocking for its time. While we think Zed is shown doing worse on screen, the implication seems to be that Maynard is in charge. Either way, they're both disgusting and well deserving of the silver medal. But taking the gold medal of evil is actually Mr. Wallace. This is a weird one. It's weird because we see worse being done to him in the aforementioned scene than we actually see him doing to anyone else. And in fact, the only killing we see Mr. Wallace doing himself is in revenge for that very thing. In comparison to all the other deaths in this movie, we find those two totally understandable. But the truth is, he's the one pulling the strings of the entire operation. To pretend that he isn't guilty in this criminal empire of his just because we don't see him pulling the trigger himself would be some Fabian levels of naivety. One of the first conversations that Vincent and Jules ever have is about Mr. Wallace killing someone over giving his wife a foot rub. Mia may discredit that theory later on, but the fact that the rumors are circulating and widely believed among his hitmen, oh yeah, also he has a team of hitmen, is very telling. The drugs are bad, The rigging of fighting matches is bad. The dispatching of anyone who doesn't fall in line, well, that's worth enough to give Mr. Wallace the gold medal, even though we actually see him largely in a sympathetic role during the actual time that he's on screen. And that's it, our ranking of Pulp Fiction characters good to evil. Who do you think was the most evil? Let us know in the comments down below. And be sure to check out Reel to Reel's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood video. It's really cool and some of our Wicked Binge team worked on it, so we'd like to show it some love. And as always, stay wicked.